All right, welcome everybody. I'm thrilled to have Dr. Suzannah Hicks with us today. She will be taking us through some AI strategy and looking at what value this could have for the business. So just to let you know that our sessions run throughout the year, we will have a mid-year break. So they run fortnightly. So it's wonderful to have you join us.
Thank you.
Okay, so just to introduce our panel of co-hosts. So we've got Omar Gawed. Wonderful to have you with us again. And thank you, Omar, for doing all those wonderful questions for our guest speakers and really looking at how we can get the most out of each session. Omar is an architect, he's an analyst, he's got a YouTube channel, The Analyst Architect. So do check that out. And then we've got Elaine Picard. So Elaine, I always say great programmer. He's also the CTO of Aiden, Chief Architect, and he also runs Iris Business Architect. My name is Deirdre Karen. I have two companies, so Agora Insights. I train business analysts and business architects. I have been doing that now for over 8 years and help them get certified. So I'm very pleased to have learners from about almost 100 countries. So that's fantastic. And then along with Elaine, started Aiden, and that was ready to have an AI system that will work for enterprise and business architects. Okay, but our guest speaker today, Dr. Hicks, wonderful to have you here, and thank you for sharing your presentation as well as a handout for our inner circle. Dr. Hicks is a pioneering AI program architect, a great title, specializing in data and governance, with a doctorate in business administration, focusing on organizational development. She leads innovation AI strategies that enhance patient access. So a great topic. I think AI and any medical industry is going to be very to enhance patient access and healthcare delivery. An adjacent professor at Johnson's and Wales University, she connects academic insights with industry challenges. Suzannah is committed to fostering ethical AI practices, which is great, and data literacy, driving meaningful change in organizations and preparing future leaders for data-driven landscapes. So wonderful to have you here and join us.
Thank you so much.
Just a quick note for our inner circle while we're on the screen. There's a wonderful presentation that Suzannah has provided. So for those who want to gain a copy, please have a look in your course. And you can just download the copy. But without further ado, let's get started.
Thank you, Deirdre. Thank you, Dr. Suzannah, for joining us today. It's really a pleasure to have you today on this series. And yes, welcome everyone to today's session. I will jump directly to the conversation.
Sure.
I'm so excited. And we hear a lot about models, tools, platforms when it comes to AI, especially.
Yes.
But none of that discuss the guiding strategy behind it. From your experience, why do strategies matter so much in the AI space and the transformation?
Yeah, it's a really important question. I'm glad you started there. For me, and what I have found, and this is why I moved in this direction from straight data scientist to more into the strategy and program architect space, is because I kept seeing this huge disconnect between what was going on in the tech world with the models, et cetera, and the business. There was no bridge. So from my perspective, an AI strategy or a data strategy, whatever it happens to be, to me, they're intricately linked. You need them because they act as your compass, your North Star, that is grounded in your business vision, your business objectives, strategic objectives, whatever they happen to be. Those two things to me have to be completely aligned. So when I sit down to formulate one, which we're working on one now at my current company to get it approved and through, it's really important that before you talk about AI, you have to have a good understanding of your business. And you have to have a good understanding of what are the strategic objectives for this year, for 3 years, for 10 years, or just for the company in general. What is our mission? What is our vision? What are we grounded in? Once we understand that, then whatever type of strategy, and depending on where you are in the business, can then be developed. In our case, of course, we're talking about AI. Using that strategy as our compass, when I sit down to write a strategy, I look at what are our business objectives. And as I go through the strategy document, I try to make sure, I make sure that every single thing that we say that we are striving to do can be linked directly back to that business vision or desired outcomes. for lots of reasons. One, not doing it and not tying those direct links in, it sets up a situation where AI starts becoming fragmented and without direction, and we start chasing shiny objects instead of remaining focused on purpose rather than platform, which is something that we see a lot right now. We'll probably talk about this, but that is a common phenomenon, a very common behavior we're seeing right now across business, is chasing the new shiny object because there are so many of them. But it ties back to what is our business strategy and how, in this case, AI, how is AI going to help us meet those particular goals?
Excellent answer. Thank you so much, Dr. Suzannah. So this was your main motive behind changing from the data scientist or the technical role to the strategy role to bridge this space?
Yes, it was. I was leading a data program at a former company that I was with for quite some time. And we were looking at solutions, right? But I kept seeing this huge disconnect. And the solutions that we would build, data science solutions, whatever they happen to be, we'd build these great models, we have these great results, and then they just get put on the shelf and they'd never be used. And over time, with my experience and talking to both the technical side, the business side, it just was very apparent to me that one of the biggest reasons for that was the complete disconnect between the two sides, between tech, AI, data, and the business. So I felt like I could be a better translator, strategist, program architect, whatever you want to call it, than I could be a data scientist. So I made that shift. And it has felt like and has been a good decision since I did that. I feel like I'm more effective at that than building models.
I think that makes a lot of sense. We have been architects. We understand that bridge is so important, because if you're not doing something of value, how do you actually justify what you're doing? And it's not just financial value. It's what is the long-term value to the organization? Why do these things matter? Because I'm sure you know that we have all this shadowware and this technical debt in business, and we don't want to add to that, do we?
No, we don't. And that's inevitable. It's going to continue to happen. But anywhere where we can minimize that, and success looks like to me is, are we providing business value? That's what it comes down to. And I think this also made sense for me because before I switched I did a huge career change 10 years ago. To focus specifically on data and now AI, from a 25 years of business management experience, particularly as a restaurant owner. So huge 180 for me. Yeah. But because of that deep business experience that I was doing data science and this stuff without knowing I was doing it, right? I was using my data to help me run my business. I've always got my business hat on when I'm thinking about particular use cases. And not every use case is going to end up being an AI solution. We're going to talk about that. Not everyone is, but you have to start there. You have to start with what is that use case. But that is what brought me to this space, was if I felt like I could really produce more value and be more productive and be more successful by bringing those two sides together.
Makes sense, especially running a restaurant. That's hard work. You got to know all about science, right?
Oh, yeah. Glad I did it. Don't want to do it again.
Yeah, for your sins, right?
No, I did my part.
Thank you.
Suzannah, you were mentioning chasing the shiny object, or maybe not the exact term you used, but there's a lot of pressure on businesses, sometimes on management, to implement AI and just go with AI and trying to get on the bandwagon. But how do you ensure alignment with AI strategies so that this does not become what you were just talking about in terms of being unrelated to the real business objectives?
And it's that is probably the common practice in most businesses, that they've already decided it's AI and they're coming at it from a reactive rather than a proactive position. So one, it comes down to, I think at the beginning, having a really honest discussion and conversation with the major stakeholders, whether it's the C-suite, the CEO, whatever, and try to talk about, look, AI is not the answer to everything, and putting that solution there first is really going to put us in a very risky position. So before we decide that AI is the solution, let's look at this from a proactive diagnostic kind of position, right? Let's talk about what is the business challenge? And I'll have a really recent example that I can provide. This is a great example. So what is the business challenge that we're trying to solve? But don't stop there. Go one step beneath that and say, why do we need to solve that? Because it's the why we need to solve it. There can be all kinds of business challenges, but if we don't understand why we're solving it, which then defines if we actually need to solve it, we'll be just doing things. We'll have projects flying all the way around. And my example is I was working with a client, and they had already decided, because they had this relationship with this company that was going to provide a solution, an AI solution. And I really pushed back, and I was like, why do we need this thing? Why do we need this? And unfortunately, that ship had already sailed for a number of reasons, which I don't need to go into, but we went at it backwards. We already decided that not only did we need an AI solution, but we needed this particular solution. And when I got back around to ask, what are we solving? It was very difficult for the stakeholders to actually answer that. And then when I asked why, there was also a challenge answering that. So I start there. What are we solving, and why do we need to actually solve that? Why are we solving that? And which then leads to, how does that anchor us to our business objectives? Because if we're just solving, it could be a valid business challenge, right? A business use case. But if it's not something that we really need to do right now, then it probably shouldn't be something we work on right now. You can't do everything all the time. The adage, don't boil the ocean. Everything can't be a priority. So if we're working on this thing, then something else maybe that we should be working on is going to get deprioritized. We see people solutioning before they talk about the business. We all have experienced that, but I try to bring it back to a diagnostic phase of really trying to understand what the problem is and why our company or the client's company actually needs to be focused on that particular challenge at this moment. And sometimes we are going to end up with an AI solution, but guess what? Sometimes we're not. Sometimes it's going to be a process improvement or a change management improvement, or it's not true AI, it's automation. You can't come in with preconceived ideas, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. So in terms of strategic alignment, what are the changes that AI brings to the table?
Right now, AI is positioned it is a huge disruptor. It is the technological disruptor of our lifetime, maybe of several lifetimes before us. I almost think of it
like
as
the Industrial Revolution.
It's okay. We had fire, major disruptor that put the humans on the path, and then we had the wheel, huge disruptor, and then the printing press, and then the steam engine with the Industrial Revolution. From my perspective, AI falls into as big as a disruptor as any of those things. And we don't even know, we're at the beginning of the beginning. We don't know what this journey is going to be. So that is one thing that absolutely makes it truly unique, is that this is not, everybody thought the disruptor was the internet. It was, but that's more communication, right? Sharing of knowledge. This is way beyond that. We are learning what can be done with AI. And this is the year of agentic AI. Like last year was all Gen AI. Now we're seeing it's all agentic AI. And we're starting to see agentic AI being commoditized with all these companies springing up like mushrooms everywhere you look, they'll do anything and everything. But it's the world we're coming to. The language of business now is data. And the way we're going to use that data is going to be via AI. So every company needs to be thinking about these. If they're not, they're likely going to be left behind. And something that I've found also is that older companies are having a harder time with this than brand new ones. And I think that's true because of the data aspect of it, because their data is not AI ready, because they've kicked the can around data governance down the road for so long that now they realize they want to do all these great AI things, which there are some really great solutions out there that can absolutely help your business, whether it's with being more efficient, more productive, more efficient, help you with revenue growth, whatever it happens to be. There's great solutions, but if you don't have the foundation, you don't have the data, then you can't do those things. And that's a huge challenge across businesses. Yeah. And I think they just came to understand that within maybe the last 6 months.
Thank you.
So let's look at how do organizations make decisions, right? Because as you've mentioned, we've got all this, not every business is ready with their data. They're going to have to be ready because when they're competing with other businesses, those who have the right content and the right context, they're going to have an advantage. So how do organizations' decision-making processes and levels of AI maturity influence the development of an AI success strategy? And so obviously people have plans and all of those kind of things, but how can they be successful? Because often it just doesn't work out, but how could they be successful in looking at an AI strategy for their organization, considering the context?
I think this is where the cross-functional nature of how we look at AI strategy comes into the picture. AI or AI strategy, it can't and doesn't live in a vacuum. It cannot be its own little vertical. It has to go across. It's got to exist in the broader ecosystem of the organization that ultimately handles the data, makes these decisions on a day-to-day basis. And you can have the best solution in the world and you can deliver it. And maybe you're able to operationalize it and take it to scale. But if the company, the cross-functional teams of the company are not using the insights, whatever the solution is delivering, if they're not using those because they don't trust it or they have an issue with adoption, whatever it happens to be, if we have not gotten them engaged in this cross-functional way across the ecosystem, it doesn't matter how great it is. It really doesn't. So we've got to get everybody involved. You also mentioned decision-making and different types of decision-making. This is something that I studied when I was doing my dissertation, was AI analytics and AI maturity compared to decision-making styles within a company. And what I found is that your level of maturity is very important, right? So if you do not have a good foundation built, and that includes your data infrastructure, your whatever architectural pattern has been designed for your system. If you're still existing in data silos rather than a more expanded, more open kind of pattern, you're going to have a lot of difficulty being successful. And what I found in terms of decision making was you also have to understand, you can't just look at your AI maturity or your data maturity by itself. You also, what I found was from a change management perspective, is that you need to understand within the company, what is the dominant decision-making style? For my purposes, I defined 4 different styles. One, you make it all the decisions completely on your own and you don't seek any of other information. And then there's the style of, I make my decision on my own, but I talk to people about it. And then the third is I make my decisions in a collaborative nature, but only use the data that's available to me by itself. And then the fourth is completely collaborative with other information. And of course, that would be the one that would most align with being more successful in terms of, in my case, I was looking at how to create a data culture, which is very important. You need both maturity, AI maturity, as well as an open and collaborative decision-making system that exists within your company. I've found that since I started looking at it that way and began assessing companies that I worked with to understand what is their inherent decision-making style now, once I understood that, then I could combine the AI strategy work with change management and organizational development work to, if they weren't quite there and how they made decisions, to help there too. And so to bring those two things together, or at least that's what my research showed.
What is the most common type of decision-making?
It depends on who you ask. So we all have either worked for or experienced that visionary founder CEO, right? Who pretty much typically believes what they want to believe. They're the toughest to get through. But what my research showed is that where it's actually on a spectrum, that we're moving closer to the collaborative with other data. But it gets closer to, the closer you get to that visionary founder type of archetype, the more you get to, I make decisions based upon my experiences and my intuition with no data and with no help. So if you know that going in, if you're a consultant and you've been brought in to develop an AI strategy and help implement it, etc., you can do a quick survey of your company and find out what is the predominant decision-making style of this company. And what I discovered is that little piece of information is so powerful, because if you understand how that company just inherently already makes decisions, then you can work to change on that front too, because you need both. You need both. You cannot do it. You can have the greatest, most mature data and technical and AI infrastructure that there ever is. And it's powerful, it's doing stuff, and it's happening even at the various business unit levels. But if the decisions are still being made in a vacuum, it won't matter. It will not matter. So you have to have both.
Fascinating. Thank you. Yeah, that's very interesting around the decision making. Very important.
Since I started implementing that piece into it, which really, it's simple to find out. It's a quick survey. It's not difficult. It's highly accurate. Since I started implementing that one little piece and then looking back to best practices of change management and just having that knowledge, I have been more successful in getting businesses to where they want to be.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's very powerful as well. And
Yeah.
I'm happy to, if anybody's interested and wants access to the survey, it's public, it's available, anybody can use it. I'm happy to share it. It's very easy to run.
I think we should get those links from you.
That's interesting.
Yeah,
That'll be
yeah.
very helpful.
Yeah, the research was fascinating. It was amazing.
Yes. And how many people did you interview? I'm just curious, because doing a PhD is hard work and you got to do lots of research and previous from.
Ultimately, I ended up surveying. I got about a 35% response rate, which is really good when it comes to surveys. And we ended up cross-referencing against 4 different companies. What I found, other than the CEO, there weren't a lot of demarcations across role or time with the company or what department they were in. Decision-making is decision-making. But at the highest levels, there's always a little bit of difference compared to the rest of the company. It's like there's 2 types of decision-making frameworks, right? There's the very highest level that has one type, and then there's how everybody else makes decisions. And that's really powerful information to have if you've been brought in to help a company do anything, honestly.
It's interesting what you say about founders, because one of the architects was working on one of these big change programs that we spoke about and was not allowed to have the job title of architect because the founder believed that they're the architect of the organization. So I think it would be a similar thing. So the architect has a particular role, like the architect's not there to own the house per se, but to work. But that kind of reminded me of that story. The founder, very strong, visionary founder, but certain things were completely off limits. And just a job title, for instance, was not at all allowed.
It's an incredibly difficult challenge to tackle. It's very difficult.
Because sometimes they might be right. That's the thing.
That is the exact thing. Because they've been successful, and it's been their vision and their experience and their intuition that's gotten them there. So why suddenly do they need to be collaborative or use data to make their decisions? Because they didn't do it before, and here they are, they're successful. It's a very hard paradigm to shift. But we all know that we need data to help us make decisions in the business world of now. But
it's true.
Breaking through that particular archetype is very challenging.
Yeah.
But identifying it and knowing that you're working up against it is immensely helpful.
That does sound helpful. Thank you.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
Yeah, very fascinating perspective, to be honest, Dr. Suzannah. And I think I can relate to some examples for the decision-making styles, but I would like to go back to what you mentioned before about the disconnection between the vision and execution. And relate them to whatever elements you mentioned as well, and how the AI strategy should move forward in this particular area, in the description of the disconnection and filling the gap, and the essential elements that you mentioned about the data, change management, all the other aspects. So from your perspective, can you elaborate more about these elements, how the organization can fit in and place them to move from the ambition of AI adoption to a value-driven execution?
Yeah, there are some basic components that I think are necessary in order to move from a strategy and a vision to delivery and execution. It's very difficult to translate that from a vision into operational reality. It's difficult, right? But as I said, there's some certain things that you need. The first being you do have to have a strong foundation to build on. And we can look at that from within our IT perspective of what do we need to build this? We know that we need data pipes. We know that we need data storage, that it's got to be accessible. The thing that I have found within that particular element that companies are struggling with right now is the state of their data. They can get to it, etc., but they don't know if they can trust it. So that's where data governance comes into place. I think not just a strong technical foundation, but we have to add on there a mature data governance program that has been executed so that we understand what data is, because you can't do anything in AI without the data. And if you don't trust the data, you don't know where it comes from, or you don't know what has happened to that data element from the point of the source of engagement to the source of record. Along the way, it's changed. We know that. But if we don't understand that via data governance, it's very difficult can we trust the insights that are coming out of it? So that's one element. The other is you need the right roles and responsibilities. It's not just going to be, I'm a strategist. I no longer build, but I need the builders. And I don't need just data scientists, because a data scientist and we could come in and I could have gone through my use case and understood it and everything's great. And we sit down and we build a model, but then you get to taking that to scale. You need a different set of skill set for that. We need our data engineers and our architects, etc. So we've got to have all these right places, but that's just within tech and data, right? Then we need the business leaders to be involved. They've got to have skin in the game, so to speak. And so when I work to take a use case, whatever it happens to be, and try to get it to execution, I try to keep the business as close as possible throughout the entire process. Even if we're doing pure agile and the teams are sprinting, I still want somebody from the business in the room to help make those decisions. So keeping them close, I think that's a really important piece, an important element of all of it. And then finally, that speaks to, you can't change the way people think without change management. So that goes back to the decision-making style. You've got to use some change management framework to help get that vision, an AI vision, to an actual executable or operationalized solution. It's going to take more than an idea, even if you have the foundation or the right people. You've got to do change management, because what I'm finding is that you almost have to, it's a paradigm shift in how people think about their business and their data. That brings up the whole question of, and this is a tangent, I'll try not to go down the rabbit hole, but is the idea of data as an asset, right? Is it an asset? My perspective is that it is an asset, but it's also a resource, and it has to be managed in that way. But if you have a company that doesn't look at it that way, then you need change management. You need some functions of change management in there to help get everybody kind of thinking in the same way. So those are the things that I look for and try to make sure that I have in place when I move to execution.
I think looking at it as an asset is really important. And I know that Omar is very much involved in managing the comms with people, which is hard work.
It is very hard to change the mindset and introduce new technologies or even new ways of thinking. So I can relate 100%.
Yes, so it is, but it's important, and it's a conversation that needs to be had.
100%.
You mentioned about data governance that helps to build trust. And I think trust is everything, and we could have a big discussion about that when using AI, because if you can't trust the insight that are provided by AI, there's not going to be adoption and so on and so forth. But what is the role of ethics in AI in helping build trust, and how
Right.
can organization really align themselves to that?
I think you've already highlighted what an important point, which is that having ethics in your AI strategy, it's not just about doing the right thing, it's about earning and maintaining that trust. And it can't just be words on a PowerPoint or a document. You actually have to do it. Because if your users, your customers, your employees, whatever, if they don't trust the systems that you've built or the data that it was built upon, they're not going to use it, and adoption will fail, which that poses a whole nother level of business risk if you've spent all this money and they're not using it because of trust. From my perspective, because I worked with a data privacy organization for a long time, so I have I have some really strong feelings about data privacy, and I do believe that it is something that we really need. We don't have it regulated in the United States except at the state level. We have the EU to guide us with the GDPR, but I do think it's really important that that people do have rights to privacy when it comes to their data. And from my perspective, when whatever solutions you're building, whether it's you're thinking about privacy or if we just put it at the broader umbrella of ethics, it's got to be there from the beginning, which in data privacy world is called privacy by design. So whatever you're building first, you're building it with privacy and ethics as part of your very first building blocks, rather than adding it on at the end. It doesn't work that way. You will fail if you do it that way. Yeah.
Security.
Exactly, just like security. And it's interesting that you mentioned security. When you bring in a new product, right, a third-party vendor, companies do a security review, or they should, right?
Yeah.
I actually add to that from my working with data privacy is there also should be a privacy review of that particular vendor product. You should do, because they're not the same thing.
No.
They're different. They're looking at different things. So I actually advocate for both. And at the end of the day, when it comes to ethics, I end up on the side of always asking if we should do it, regardless of whether we can. Just because we can doesn't mean we should. So I try to inject that conversation at the very beginning of these discussions is, okay, fine, we can build that, but should we? And it's a philosophical, theoretical discussion that has to happen about. And typically it leads to companies really digging deep into talking and thinking about how they want to use their data and for what. And I think the days of the Wild Wild West where you used it for anything and everything, regardless. Think back to 2012 and all those silly Facebook tests that we were all taking to find out what grease character we were. We found out what they were doing with that data, right? They were completely social engineering us to learn who we are. So just because you can doesn't mean you should. And I think you have to lead with that. You have to lead with that question.
And you mentioned at the beginning, it's not only a PowerPoint, it's something you put on a PowerPoint to talk about ethics, but how do you communicate ethics to your staff? That might be a bit easier within your organization, but also to your customer. So how is it more than just something that you would communicate on a PowerPoint so that it can help to build trust?
And that is difficult to do, but there are some things that you can actually do. And let's start internally first. One, when I start working with a client or a new company, I try to assess what is the data literacy of that particular organization right from the start. And if it is lacking, I typically want to jumpstart a data and AI literacy program ASAP. So let's get everybody to a certain benchmark so we understand what we're talking about. I think every company should have a certain level of data literacy. As I mentioned, from my perspective, data is the language of business now, and we all need to have a certain level of understanding. So driving data and AI literacy is really important, especially amongst our leadership. And you can't assume that your tech folks understand it either, because they may not. So assume that people don't know as much about it and just stick a program in place. If you can't find one, there's tons out there. The resources are available. So that's a place that I start. But it's more than that. You have to have, once you have governance in place, you can't just have data governance, meaning we're tagging our data. I actually advocate that there needs to be an AI governance council or board or some sort of meeting of the minds that is actually a decision-making body within a company. This is a very hard point to get adopted because nobody wants to do one more committee thing, and it is more work, but it's very important work. you can decide within your own company what the scope of that particular entity is. Do they make all the decisions? Do they make only the decisions of if we're using our data, is that when they get involved and they make decisions about that? It can be, the scope can be whatever you want it to be. There needs to be some oversight, and it can't be too big. We know that committees by sprawl do not work. You have to figure out who are the right roles, the right people, etc. Define the roles and responsibilities, but defining the scope of the decision making is really important. And whatever that happens to be, that's where I think the ethics become actuality instead of just words on paper or a PowerPoint slide.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I think the roles need to be diverse as well, because often what happens is there's that confirmation bias that people have. Yes, we all agree because we all believe in X. So it's not about gender or anything like that, but it's about people who have different ways of thinking.
Yes.
For instance, you might actually bring an analyst in as the one of the on the board, let's say, to have those discussions, or you might actually bring somebody who works in a particular area of support. And I think that's also part of what's really important with the decision making, is that a lot of the time decision making is a ranking, but sometimes with things that we don't know, like AI, it might be helpful having decisions made from people that have different perspectives.
Absolutely.
And have different thinking, which is not typical.
No,
you know.
I agree. The selection criteria for your board, I think the diversity there is really important. Otherwise, you're operating in a vacuum once again. We need innovation. It comes from diversity of thought. So we need a diverse group.
Yeah.
And when we're talking about ethics, you really do need that. You cannot have 5 people that already agree on whatever it happens to be. You need a diverse group. So yes, you need to grab somebody from marketing or from training or from whatever it happens to be. And they'll probably say, I don't know anything about ethics and AI. And what they come to find out is that we're not actually we're talking about basic things, good versus bad. Should we or should we not? It's not really about the AI solution. It's should we? Just because we can, should we?
Yeah. Many years ago, I had a boss, and a very German boss, and everything that I did, he said to me, how do you measure that?
Ah, yes, this question.
So he was really good, really good. One of the most favorite people I worked with, but man, everything that you did was about a measure. So I'm going to ask you about the measure now. And
yeah, it's important.
It is so important. And so how do organizations measure their success in terms of our strategy? So how does it add value to the business, to what we're doing? How is success measured?
So right off the top, I'm going to say that I absolutely agree with you. We must measure this, and you have to measure not just your solutions, but you have to actually measure, is our strategy working? Are we doing what we said we're going to do? And some of those things you can actually track back to, depending on how you wrote your strategy. Say, we want to decrease or increase efficiency 5% year over year. That's one of the business goals. And then I come in and I say, okay, we're going to do these things. We're going to pilot 3 AI things to try to increase efficiency. And then we can measure, did we achieve that or not? That's easy. We can do that, right? But it's got to go beyond that. So some things are going to be straightforward. You link what you're doing in your AI strategy to that business goal. Did we achieve it? Did we not achieve it? But you have to enumerate what those are that you are measuring at the beginning, so that you can take the measurements at regular intervals. You also have to have somebody owning the measuring. Somebody's got to own that part of it. But it's not just, did it work or did it not work? You also have to, I think there's 2 types of measures. There's technical measurements within AI, which gets down to the really nitty gritty, like model accuracy, data drift, bias, latency, etc. Those are things that we can measure within our model. But then there's business level metrics, right? That are equally, some would say maybe even more important, because we could have the best performing model in the work, but if it's not influencing decision making, then it doesn't matter. You can think of it in terms of, are we meeting those objectives, but also, are we reducing customer complaints due to better forecasting? But there's also operational metrics that you have to monitor too, like adoption. We brought in an efficiency gainer solution within our company. We measure whether or not we're gaining that efficiency, but we should also measure how are our employees using it? What is the adoption rate of that? So measurements are very important, and I think you have to measure different things, technical things, operational, actual, concrete business metrics that we've already highlighted. But the biggest point, I think, when you're writing your strategy is you have to enumerate and define those metrics as part of your strategy document. They cannot be an afterthought. They have to be part of the strategy document, which also will keep them grounded in that alignment to business strategy. You can't just know if it's technically working. You have to know if it's changing how we work. Is it bettering our business model? That's really the test of strategic value, I think.
Yeah, agree with you.
And it's hard.
It is so hard. Measuring, because measuring is, people often just think of money or time, but there's other measures that have value. Like you said, the user experience. Are people adopting it? How easy is it to understand? Those non-functional requirements, those are the things that often bite you in the end, because you just didn't think. And if people just globally choose not to do it, it's really difficult. So,
there's that old adage, if you don't measure it, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And it is true.
Agree.
And from a practitioner standpoint, you also want to measure how well your solutions are performing so you can keep your program going, so you can get the resources you need. I don't say that lightly, but we can't keep our teams up to the capacity we need if we can't show value. So you need to measure that as well. It's extremely important.
Thank you.
It is really important, Dr. Suzannah, because, for example, defining the value, from my perspective, would help a lot in defining the metrics. Because metrics does not have a playbook that can be used across all the organizations or across all the industries. It is very customized according to each domain, even each organization within the same domain. And I think the maturity level as well of this organization defines the level of metrics that we should go for. And mentioning the measurements and all the organizations that are still figuring out how to align their AI strategies with a real business outcome. I can recall that you mentioned about a success story that you can share it with us on how an organization aligned this strategy and it is operationalized right now.
Sure. Yeah.
So can you discuss this and mention the success factors behind this success story?
Yeah. So we're gonna go way back in time, and I'm gonna pull from my restaurant days. And I'll say right up front, I didn't know I was doing anything data related or AI related when I was doing it, but I had a very definite use case. I needed to reduce inventory waste. Very important in the restaurant management world, and it's all tied to your revenue forecasting, which typically happens on a weekly cycle. And if you get it wrong, even just 1 week, it can really mess up. It'll mess up the month, it'll mess up the quarter, whatever. It's really important. So I had to figure out a way to create a process, and in the end, it ended up being a model that would help me reduce waste by increasing the accuracy of my forecasts. So I started with a very defined use case, and I understood why I needed to do this. So right there, I didn't sit down and write a strategy for this. I'm just walking you through how it turns out that I did all these things right, and I didn't know I was doing it at the time. So I started with a very well-defined, I knew my use case, I knew my industry really well. I understood here was my pain point. I understood why I needed to do this, because it was affecting my bottom line. It was affecting my managers. It really was something that we really needed to tackle. Even with all my experience, I couldn't be that visionary founder and rely on my intuition to make sales projections, right? So I had to rely on data, because I was getting it pretty right, but I wasn't as accurate as I should be. So in the end, what ended up happening was we put together a model, and I didn't rely only on myself. I asked my managers and my frontline people to help me think of what are the data points that actually influence our demand. Because instead of looking at the inventory, we started and the forecast, because those were the results that we needed. We looked at it from what influences our demand, what influences if we have a good day versus a bad day. And what we built through this cross-functional team that I put together in a restaurant, not knowing that I was doing AI, is we built a very diverse data set. We pulled in past sales, past inventory levels. We pulled in staffing levels. We pulled in weather, historic weather for that particular week from previous years, as well as the weather forecast that was coming up. External events like town events that were happening. There was a big home football game that night, or whatever it happened to be. You have to know, we knew our markets, so we understood what these external factors are that do impact your business. So we put together this diverse team with a very clearly defined objective, because we knew what the pain point was. We understood our mission. We put together a diverse team, which then built a very diverse data set. And then we pulled together a model in Excel, not knowing that we were building a model. And it turned out that we were able to reduce waste by 20% in the first year of using this. And we increased our accuracy of projected revenue of how much we were going to do on a daily and weekly basis by 30%.
Wow.
It was huge. It was huge. But I didn't know that I was executing a data strategy or an AI strategy. I didn't even know that I was doing data science or AI. I didn't understand any of these things. But looking back on it, it had all the components that we've already talked about that make an AI strategy successful. And of course, we measured it. Otherwise, I couldn't tell you that we reduced waste by 20%. We counted inventory every single night, so I knew exactly when we were hitting the mark and when we weren't. It also, because I took the stress off the managers, the employee satisfaction went up. Their stress levels went down. The whole morale of the store changed because we solved this very large business pain point. And it's only looking back on it from where I sit now, after doing data and AI specifically during this second career of mine, that I actually recognize that is an AI success story happening in a pizza restaurant, which also shows that if you have these principles, it doesn't matter what industry you're in or how big you are or how small you are. The principles are the same.
Yeah, I'd agree with you.
It was really cool too. It was very satisfying.
Fascinating, to be honest.
Yeah. It doesn't matter what you're doing. It's good practice, and it shows, and it actually brings value. You can be in any industry, for-profit, non-profit. You could be a pizza restaurant. You could be IBM. It's going to be the same. Success is measured by what is the value, the business value that it brings to you, your particular organization.
Yeah. 100%.
When we look at strategy, we do that in terms of getting to some execution to deliver on those strategies. And as an AI program architect, how do you bridge that gap between the strategy and the execution, especially in terms of AI itself?
So this is gonna sound a little redundant, but it's because I believe this to be the truth. So as an AI program architect or strategist, doesn't matter what you call it, we're the translators, right? That's where I already said that I figured out that's why I wanted to come here, is because we're the bridge, the translators between the truly technical and the only business folks. Somebody's got to be in the middle, and those are really key roles, and you should have a few of them. And these typically end up being change agents in a company when you bring them in. If you go back and you look over the last couple of years for data strategists or AI strategists in terms of jobs, you're not going to find any. It's only been recently that these jobs have shown up, and it's because companies are finally realizing that they need somebody to develop these things, put them through and execute them, but then operate as that translator between the space, right? And then again, every single AI deliverable or solution that you set out to deliver has to be anchored in a defined business goal or objective. If it doesn't link back to that, then you should not be doing it. You should, that's it, period, stop. If you can't link it to a strategic objective that the company has already decided it's going to do, then you shouldn't be doing it. But you also, how do you know if those jobs are going to do that? And how do you know which solutions, use cases do you go after? And that gets a little messy because now we're talking about prioritization, which we all know is incredibly difficult, right? Because everything can't be prioritized. So which use cases do you chase after? And maybe I'm getting ahead a little bit, but this is really important, I think, in terms of the architect's role, is helping the business decide. I don't make the decision. I create the framework for the decision, right? I can create the decision frameworks, but I'm not the one that ultimately makes the decision of which use case we're going to try to solve. I facilitate that discussion via a framework. And we look at the framework that I use as we look at it in terms of how critical it is to the business, how important it is, where is it a priority versus the level of effort, right? And what you want is low effort, high priority. Those are your winners, right? And
there's always, as I've been reminded a number of times by people that are on the operating side of the business, often rather than management, we have to keep the lights on.
Yeah.
And that's a high priority, but it's not in the strategic objective to keep the lights on. If we think about IT, you might need to migrate to the new version of whatever software that you have. You have no choice, but that doesn't bring any revenue to the company. It's not very strategic, or it is at some point when the technical debt gets too high. But that makes managing those priorities a bit harder, though.
You have to do those things. You have to do tech for tech, and you have to do data for data. Because if you don't, you end up being the company without a foundation, without the infrastructure, with no data governance. And guess what? They're not AI ready. They can't do any of the things we're talking about. I can write them a strategy, but they're not going to be able to execute it. So those things have to take place too. And those are really hard to get through the approval process, because if anything, not only does it not have a revenue return, it actually costs money.
Yeah.
And there's not a hard return. There's a soft return that we're going to see over years, but no, we're not going to update our systems and see our revenue go up. What we're going to see is that we spent a lot of money and it didn't affect this over here at all yet.
And during that time, those priorities that were strategic are not getting executed.
That's right. That's right. And it's really hard. That is so hard to get through. But as folks, those of us that have worked in this weird information technology, data, AI space, it's really hard to get the company leadership on board with those projects. Even when we show how important they are, I think those are the hardest projects to get through.
Yeah.
But we have to do it. And we have to keep fighting to do it. And the way to show it is that if we don't do it, we're going to get left behind. That's what I've found the best framework.
Thank you.
So what advice would you give leaders who are going into this? And it doesn't have to be just the AI strategy. There's lots of change happening in the organization. Yes. And as somebody who's had experience on several things, and let's say somebody's been put into this leadership role, what advice would you give them?
One of the things right now that I think is that anybody in this space needs to be aware of on a daily basis is that we are in a time of high innovation. Everything is evolving right now at an exponential rate. I take time out of my day in the morning before I open my email, before I let teams know that I'm here. And I've got a couple curated newsletters that I feel keep me up to date to see what's changed since yesterday. That's how fast the AI news cycle, if you will, is changing. You have to stay up. You have to stay up to date.
Exhausting. You
have to know what's going on. It is. It's exhausting. Yeah. It's hard. Staying up to date in terms of knowing what's going on and building in trying to stay up to date is almost impossible. So whatever your AI strategy is that you're doing, you've got to build flexibility into it. I just recently delivered an AI strategy and had a 3-year roadmap. When I think about a 3-year roadmap in the context of this conversation that we just had, that seems ridiculous, because it is absolutely ridiculous. There is no way we're going to execute a 3-year roadmap. In 6 months, we're going to have to remake the roadmap because everything will have changed. But we just need to accept that. You still have to set a direction. So you've got to do it knowing that we're doing this in a culture of innovation with flexibility, knowing that thing we say that we're going to do in 18 months, likely we're not, but guess what? We might do it sooner, right? You have to be flexible. You've got to be nimble, and you've got to be able to go with the flow, so to speak, right now, because things are changing so fast. Look at the difference from where we are today before OpenAI announced ChatGPT. That was not that long ago, but it feels like a lifetime ago, right?
Yeah.
And now we've got not just Gen AI answering all our questions for us, right? Because it has the world's knowledge at its fingertips. We've got the rise of agentic AI that's being commoditized. So now we've got agents that are agentic agents that are now executing triggered processes autonomously, right? One of the best use cases is a call center. So it's making decisions. It seems like such a harmless use case scenario to look at, but these agents are making a decision about what is the disposition of this call as soon as it comes in. And then it makes a decision, send it here or send it here. And it keeps making decisions, and it's doing it behind the scenes by itself, hopefully with some guardrails and some defined processes that the humans have written into it. I would say you've got to remain flexible. You've got to continue to focus on keeping your skill sets up to snuff. You've got to be hiring for capability building, not just what they know now, but can they learn? Are they willing to learn? We need to do that. And then there's scalability. And I think this is really important. This is where data architecture and AI architecture is really important. And I think we've finally realized, those of us that are in this space, that traditional data management and traditional architectural patterns are no longer sufficient as the foundations for what we need. We need something else. So the traditional data warehouse, it's done, right? It still is going to be there, but it's not going to allow you to do the new stuff. And what I've found working with architects that I admire and respect and really have learned a lot from is you've got to embrace modularity, right? Modularity architecture so that you can plug and play in order to remain scalable, because being able to scale up quickly is now more than ever an important piece that you've got to be focused on.
Awesome. Yeah, it is a lot.
It's a lot.
As we wrap up our discussion, I'm very interested in this discussion, and it is awesome, to be honest. I want to bring back your perspective on success, and I would like to relate it to the decision-making styles, how the definition of success from your perspective will influence or impact the leadership style or the decision-making style that we discussed before.
I think that comes to how each of us define success, which I think we have to look at both, at least I do, on a personal level of what I think success looks like and how the company defines success, as well as when you sit down to do a project, one of the first things that you should do during discovery is define what the success looks like for that particular project. So we need to identify what success is at the beginning. If you don't know what it looks like, how do you know when you hit it? But it's a personal thing as well as a business thing. So for me, an AI solution is not successful if it just works. It's successful if it has improved decision-making, if it has empowered the team, if it has helped the company meet those 3-year or 10-year objectives that they've set out, and it's done it in an ethical and responsible way, having done no harm. That's where it stands with me in terms of data and AI, and maybe in business. Yeah.
That's a good measure.
Yeah, but how do you measure that? That's a whole other conversation, right? How do you measure that particular thing?
It's exactly what you mean. All right. So from my side, I just want to say thank you very much for your time, Suzannah. I think it's been awesome and contributing, sharing with the group of analysts and architects that we have. I appreciate the time and the comments made around that.
Thank you, Dr. Suzannah. I enjoyed the session so much, and I have learned a lot from you. Thanks so much for your time.
It was wonderful. It really was. You guys asked some great questions. I think we hit on some really important topics that we didn't even know we were going to talk about. So that's wonderful. It's wonderful to keep the conversation going with good people.